Namaskar, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a month of a break, but we're back at it again. Hit the subscribe button and the notification button to not miss any of the upcoming podcasts. Very excited for what's coming. And today's podcast is with Sunaina from Nepal, who's a classical Hatha Yoga teacher trained by Isha Foundation. And she actually went to Kailash with Sadhguru, which is one of the very exciting things he spoke about, as well as Kashi Krama, being in Sadhguru's presence, physical presence, her experience of teaching outside and within the ashram, because she did volunteer and she was a staff at the Isha Rejuvenation Center. So all of this and much more, I hope you enjoy.
Because I was such a different person. Different person isn't, we have this impression that a person has to be a certain way to get into spirituality. Now I understand that's a misconception. I think that is why so many people from all over the world resonate with spirituality, because it's got nothing to do with caste and religion and creed, but it's to do with you and your efforts. I was looking for something where it was not about believing someone, it was about working hard to get results, and that's what I like about Isha Foundation. That's what I like about Sadhguru. He initiates you into practices and he says, you have to create your own life. I remember one profound thing that he told us during the treks. We used to trek with him every day. Today in our trek, you just look at everything without giving it a name. As we came closer to Kailash Mansarovar, he kind of changed. Why is there such a difference between that reality and this reality? And then you start questioning, like, can it not be the same every moment? Do I have to always depend on an external intoxication or an external factor to get me into that state? How are you? Namaskar.
Namaskaram. Thank you for coming onto the podcast. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me.
The audience really loves when they get to know a little bit more about like where you come from, how growing up was for you. So if you could start by telling us about a little bit more about you and where that seed started to sprout, where yoga and spirituality really came in.
So I am from Kathmandu in Nepal, which is a very spiritually charged up place. So growing up, my mother and my grandmother, I live in a joint family. There are 10 of us, and it's a very my mother and my grandmother, they're very religious. They have their own puja rooms with like different pictures of different deities, and every morning like they do their rituals till date. So growing up, even I had a small like space in my grandmom's puja room, where I would have a few pictures of deities, and I would also, put flowers and just do. So I started this when I was 5 years old, and I was always I used to enjoy the process. I used to I like the devotion part of it, and I used to feel good. Now when I look back, maybe energetically, I used to feel very vibrant after doing these, you know, repeating these Sanskrit chants, or lighting an incense or something like that. But I was never really curious about to read about it or to know about, let's say, the Mahabharata or Ramayana. I wasn't never inclined as such, though my grandmom did tell us, but it wasn't much of interest. But temple visiting, and for us as kids, I have a younger brother and two other cousin brothers in our joint family. So for us, like, temple visits were a compulsory thing, during festivals, or during, like, if, like, whatever, after holidays, we would have to go to these temples. So that was just part of our ritual. Like, my first Mahashivratri was when I was 5 years old, when I was like in Pashupati Nath. And it's so funny, I remember this so vividly. My dad and my uncle took me, and I remember they were all naked sadhus. I remember this, and I was just like, what is going on? I was so young. But I remember that night being really powerful. Like, I was quite overwhelmed as a young kid. But after that, I don't remember going for Shivratri again. But so yeah, so I always grew up like going to temples. And then when I was 9 years old, I went to India for further studies to a boarding school in Rajasthan for 9 years. This was just part of our family tradition. My grandparents, my parents, all of us did this, go to different boarding schools in India, because I'm half Indian. So I spent most of my time in Rajasthan. It was an all-girls school, and my brother, they were in the opposite brother school, which was an all-boys school. So when we would come back for our vacations, again, we had to keep going to. I mean, we would always go to temples. Like when we reached, we would visit like 8 to 10 temples like in a day, and come back. And before we left for boarding school, again, we would do that. So in a year, we would do that 4 times. Like I said, I never really got into why. I didn't question too much. I just enjoyed the process, and that was about it. And I used to pray to God every night and have conversations with God, but that was about it. So yeah, so most of my life I spent in boarding school. Amongst, I made a lot of good friends there because I grew up with these girls since I was 9 years old till I was 18. So they were like my sisters. Very very close friends I've made from all parts of India. uh, Other than that, I had a lot of trouble adjusting in school. I was a very rebellious child, always getting into trouble with my teachers, always questioning the whole, the rules and the regulations. So that was a huge struggle. I was very rebellious. Uh, and So even in school, I used to, before going to bed, I used to read the Hanuman Chalisa every night and I had a picture of Saraswati, who's like, the goddess, Devi goddess of knowledge. So my grandmom had given me her frame. So I would put her under my pillow, and every night before sleeping, I would do that. But that was just part of it. I never really questioned it again. So, so yeah, my life was quite simple. For 9 years, we were just, like going through with school. And then when I went to, I finished school, and then I went to Mumbai, to Bombay, to university called St. Xavier's there. I spent 3 years of my life. And that's where, I started consciously. I was very curious about like meditation. I met a couple of people who were also into meditation, and I also had some experimentation with psychedelics, which also opened me up to questioning things, because your experience when you're in that state is so different. And then you come back and then you're like, why is there such a difference between that reality and this reality? And then you start questioning, like, can it not be the same every moment? Do I have to always depend on an external uh, intoxication or an external factor to get me into that state? So that was always my question within. But I didn't stop indulging and experimenting, and smoking marijuana here and there. And also that was the culture. My college was, it's a very good college in India, but that was the culture there. And even in Nepal, there's I think the youth, everybody's doing it, not really questioning it, but everybody loves to get high. So that was how I was for many years. And that's when seeking happened. And then also I went through my own like share of life experiences, relationships, which make you question, which open you up to different aspects of yourself, different emotions. And then what happened is, I was a very fit person in boarding school. I was into hockey, heavily into sports, and very fit, I would say. So when I went to university, I thought I was invincible. So I was living a very compulsive life, like just based on impulse. I want to eat, I want to sleep, I want to smoke, I want to do. And there was no routine as such. We were so young, we just wanted to explore. So that went on for quite some time, and after a few years, I felt like it took a toll. Like I lost a lot of weight, I was very lethargic, very irritable, and like there was no clarity as such. Also there was a desire to do something, but there was no clarity as such. And also I had stopped praying, I would say. I had stopped that routine, and I had completely stopped any sort of like uh inward process. Even if it was for 5 minutes that I was sitting, like, read something, I was still closing my eyes, or just connecting with myself. I completely stopped that. And I felt like I realized that it was quite important back then, but I didn't know how to get myself to doing that again. I didn't connect to like reading the Hanuman Chalisa. Or, I didn't connect to that. So then my aunt, who's very close to me, she had got into something called Daisaku, uh, Isika Daisaku's Buddhism. No, sorry, Daishonin. Sorry, I'm getting the name wrong, but it's called Nam Yoha Rengi Kyo. That's what he makes you do. He makes you chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And the whole thing is that when you chant it, that reverberation is what like opens you up. And anything you want, you have to just attract it as you chant that. And there are books to read, and you have to go for different meetings. So I didn't go to meetings as such, but I read a few books my aunt gave me, and I used to try and chant. And I liked the whole ideology behind it, where it was not about a deity or praying, but it was more like universal, connecting to, like, yourself through nature or through vibrations, so stuff like that. So I did that for a few months, but again, I didn't have that discipline, so I would do it for a few weeks and stop. Anyway, so all of that happened, and I think in those 3 years of my college life, from 2009 to 2012, is when something in me was really longing for something more. And where Sadhguru says, when the pain of ignorance burns, like, spirituality will open up. So I wasn't conscious that what I was seeking was something like more. And I think that was there throughout my life, even in boarding school. I remember, because I was so rebellious, and I had so much energy, but I didn't like follow the rules and regulations. So I spent it a lot in arguing, fighting with teachers. So I remember my house mistress, who was like a monk. She used to follow Sai Baba, and she was like, didn't eat garlic onion, was not married, meditated every day. She would tell me, you should meditate. And she suggested I read, the monk who stole the Ferrari. I think that's the book, right? And I was just like, no, ma'am. I just took it like an insult. I was like, no, I'm not going to read a book like this. Back then, when I was like 15, 16. So I felt like that energy, which was so strong in me, which hadn't been used constructively, when I went out of school, I kind of was a bit destructive. So in 2012, I remember one of my friends, she told me, like, there's a very powerful yogi who does meditations all night. So I was very intrigued and curious about meditation. And even my friends who I did psychedelics with, he would always guide me and say, you should meditate, you should meditate. So I was like, let's go. I can't meditate on my own, but let's go check it out. So she, me, and another friend, that same friend, three of us, we went to this place called Juhu in Bombay, where they had a center, and over there they were broadcasting Sadhguru's Mahashivratri from South India. So when I entered, I saw him on the screen, and I was like, yeah, okay, typical, because in Nepal, like, my grandmom has been into spirituality, and she, my aunts, they all had been to Kailash when I was in college. So I remember them calling me and saying, we're going to this mountain and we could even die. And I was like, what? I was like, you're so weird. So I was used to that. My grandmom had a sannyas who was very close to her. He used to come to the house. So I was used to your gurus with the long beards. So when I saw Sadhguru, I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. So we made it for the midnight satsang, and I remember they gave us food, and then he comes and he's like, repeat this after me. So while repeating that, I don't know what it was, but I remember I was just going through a lot in my life, and while repeating that, some memories came into my mind which got me emotional. So I started like crying a little bit, and suddenly out of nowhere, I just was sobbing, and I didn't know what hit me. I just was sobbing so hard, and I got embarrassed. I was like, what are my friends going to say? Luckily the lights were off. So anyway, one friend of mine left, and then there were just two of us, and I was like, I'm going to stay on for some more time. So I stayed for 2 more hours, and we went back. So the next day I was just shaken. I was like, what happened? Why did I cry like that? I was like, there was no reason for me to get so emotional. So I Googled Sadhguru, and I connected to what he was saying, but I was just like, no, I was getting very drawn to the words and what he was putting out there. But I was like, no, he's too old, and like, this is for old people, and he's got such a long beard. I was 21, and I was like, "Ah, no, not my seat." And I left, and I didn't go further. But when I look back, it's so obvious, but I don't know, something happened that night. Maybe it was an initiation, I don't know. But my life really changed after that night, and I left Bombay very abruptly. The plan was to stay there and work. I went back to Nepal after 12 years of being, in boarding school for most of my time. And I decided I'm going to be home for some time and, work there and just like get my life sorted in terms of discipline. And not just that, I thought I'll just be with family as well. So I came back, and it was really funny. But the 3 years before I joined Isha in 2014, a lot of spirituality came to me in those 3 years when I went back home. Like I met, people who introduced me to, like, gave me books of Osho or different other books. or I met healers, spiritual teachers, and it was so funny that they would just tell me that you should meditate, you should go into this path. They would keep telling me these things. And hey, and my mother, we always just laugh and be like, what? Because I was such a different person. Different person isn't, we have this impression that a person has to be a certain way to get into spirituality. Now I understand that's a misconception. So, but back then, me and my mom and my family would just laugh and be like, no, definitely not, like, not me. So, I started reading some books, and one particular book called Laws of the Spirit World, I remember. It really touched me. It just talks about like what happens after death and what happens to the spirit, and it just opened me up to a different world altogether. And I was like, wow, what is this? Like, I never thought about life so deeply, like after and before. So I think something happened, and then I did Art of Living. Like, that's the first time I did Art of Living. I did a program, and when I did the program, I remember the initiation was really good. Like, and when I came back and started doing the programs, the practices, I remember feeling really good. Like, I was having a lot of experiences, and which really excited me. And I started Googling about them, and it led me to different things. So I went to my parents. I was like, I think this is happening to me. So they were just like, don't complicate life, just be simple, just be normal, So I was like, oh, okay. So I just stopped it. I was like not like, I lost motivation, and also it required discipline, and I don't think I could, maintain that discipline. So anyway, I continued with, like, I went and I worked at an ad firm in Nepal. It was an American ad firm. I interned for 6 7 months. Then I joined a Nepalese newspaper. It was a publication house. I worked there for 2 years, where I was doing media marketing and a little bit of journalism, a little bit, but more of marketing. So when I was working for the newspaper, every weekend we were covering like elections in Nepal, and uh, just reading that all the time, just made me wonder what's going on, like, made me more aware of what is happening in the world. And it kind of like, it urged me, like, I felt restless. I was just like, the solutions are given, they say they will implement, but they really don't, and we're just running in circles again and again. So I was like, how do we get to the root problem? And that's where there was this desire for me to, want to do something where I can contribute to the world, where I could, like, help, be part of a solution rather than, a problem. But I was very aware that I had my own limitations as a human being. I had my own compulsions. I was not disciplined, I was doing the basic. I was going to my office, coming back, earning money, partying in the weekends, hanging out with friends, saving money, traveling the world, of traveling places. I was doing those things. But if I really looked within, I was not disciplined, And also, I don't know. I just had this desire to do something more. And also, my family is from politics. I come from a political family where I've seen my grandfather, my uncle, my father, all of them, being involved. My dad is not a politician, but my uncle and grandfather are. But my dad is equally involved. So just seeing them also, working so hard to, help for the betterment of the country. But it's been, Nepal goes through so many ups and downs. Anyway, so I don't know. Maybe that influence also. So then, yeah, so that's what happened. And then a friend of mine told me about teacher training in 2012, and I didn't connect and resonate back then. But 3 years later, when I, was done with, like, and doing an office job, and I wanted to do something, I was seeking, like, in the sense, I wanted to pursue my further studies. I thought I wanted to just do my master's. So I left and I went and stayed with my aunt in the US for 3 years, sorry, for 3 months. And I went and visited my friends, like, checked out a few colleges, and just, I was like, what do I want to do with my life? Then I was like, I want to do something with development studies. But I've never been academically so inclined. So I was like, I don't know if I can pull that off, but I really wanted to do something where I could help and help myself. So I thought, to help myself, I should learn an instrument. I don't know, to go inward, I should know an instrument. And to help the world, I should do development studies. That's what I thought in my head. Anyway, so while I was in America, I came across this book called Eating Animals. And uh, again, that book just completely, it really left a deep impact, because I was eating meat all my life, and that, I had no idea that where meat comes from, how animals are treated, the whole business behind the meat industry. I had no clue. I was so naive and ignorant. And I remember while reading that book, I would just be in tears. I would just have to shut that book, and I was actually quite like sad for a few days, few weeks, because I didn't think that the world would be so corrupt that they wouldn't even leave food. I just thought food would be pure. So I decided that I would definitely be a non. I would turn into a vegetarian. But I was like, once I go back home, I wasn't emotionally, like, oh, like in the sense like I didn't leave meat immediately. Logically, I had to educate myself. So then the book led me to a documentary, which led me to see it visually, which left a deeper impact. And then I came back to Nepal, and then I left meat, and that was a big thing, like, of course, amongst my family and friends. Mm, and then my friend got in touch with me again, who told me about teacher training. And then he told me that he's planning to go for teacher training. And I didn't know what exactly teacher training was. I had no clue what Sadhguru really was. I was just like, Rohan, could you please give me the link? I think I'll join you. And then he's like, what? You're going to join me? And then I was like, yeah, just give me the link. I was like, I said, I've been trying to get disciplined, go to the gym or try something and be regular at it. But I've been struggling the last 3, 4, or 7 years. I said, I need a boot camp kind of environment. And 21 weeks seems like perfect, and I said, I'll get a teacher training certificate. Once I go to the US, I can teach it part time, earn pocket money. So that was the plan. So I told my parents, they were shocked. They were like, yoga teacher? Like, from where? And then I told them why, and then they were like, okay, let's be fair. Whatever yoga the one you learned with Art of Living, you practice it every day. And you see for 1, 2 months if you really want to do it. Because, it's. So I said, okay, fair enough. So I started doing the yoga every day, Surya Namaskar, and it felt good. Every day I just was drawn to it even more and more. I consciously did not watch too many of Sadhguru's videos because I was skeptical and I was like, I don't want to get brainwashed by a guru. So I watched very few videos, out of which one of them he talks about, he says, if you want to change the world, I don't know his exact words, but this is the gist. He said, if you want world peace, poverty, all of these problems in the world to be taken care of, the most important aspect is we need to tap into human consciousness. People need to go inward. So that really resonated, and I was like, oh, okay, this will even come handy for what I want to do with my development studies, in my master's. So anyway, so then that year I lost my aunt to cancer, and just to see her get so bad in just 3 years, 3 months, and then fourth, fifth month she passed away was eye opening for me. Like I couldn't believe that not neglecting yourself or a disease could just take you away like that. So I was really shaken, and it motivated me, and I was like, I definitely want to take care of my health. I've neglected it for many years. I don't want to live like this anymore. And then few months later, there was that earthquake which happened in 2015 in Nepal. So that again was a very, very intense experience for me after losing an aunt to cancer, because at that moment when the earthquake happened, you just realize how insignificant everything is. In a moment everything can just collapse. Like, everything we're working so hard towards, be it our families, our careers, everything, it just goes, or it could go just with like one event. So it just really shook me, and I was just like quite like shocked for a few days. I was like, what? I think everybody was in Nepal. But these two incidents like strengthened my desire to go to teacher training even more. So that's how I ended up going to teacher training. And a month prior to that, I did in engineering, because the school said, at least do in engineering. So I did that, and it was really good. It was really good. Though the morning videos were very challenging for me because I was just dozing off, and I was like, how am I going to pull off teacher training? Because obviously it's going to be early in the morning. But while practicing Shambhavi Mahamudra, no, what the funny part was, when I got initiated while doing Shambhavi, it's so funny. While the whole process when we're closing our eyes, right? When that process was going on, it took me back to that night 3 years earlier, when that Mahashivratri thing happened, when I was crying. And the way I felt that evening, I felt the same then. And I was like, what the heck? What's going on? Like, it was so surreal that moment. Anyway, so I was doing my practices every day. I was hell bent that I want to complete the mandala. So I completed the mandala. 2 weeks I was in Nepal, and then the other 2 weeks I completed it during teacher training. But in those 2 weeks itself, I could see myself so vibrant. I was looking fresher, I was looking brighter. I hadn't left my job yet. My people at work were like, "Why are you looking so bright and fresh?" And I was like, "I'm feeling so good." And then I remember I went for a meeting with my boss to a particular hotel, and the GM of the hotel had ordered wine. So he ordered a glass of wine for three of us, and I remember drinking it, and I could polish off three glasses, I think, or more. I drank half the glass, and I got so drunk, and I was like, "This is so strange. How am I so drunk with just half a glass?" And I was like, "What am I doing different?" The only thing different was this teacher tree. I mean, Shambhavi. And I was like, "Wow, this is so cool!" I was like, if I can be free of all of these intoxicants and get high by myself, that would be so cool. But I never thought that could be possible. So I was like, okay, let's think about that later. Let's take it step by step. And anyway, so that's how I came into teacher training. And that's a very long story, Stephen. I'm sorry.
Don't worry, it's fine.
you
It's
you
fine.
have to cut me because I have a tendency to give too much information. So you can just cut me, please.
No, I love the way that things kind of really came together in a certain way. And what I'm really
Mhm.
curious about is actually you coming from um, a rather ritualistic religious background and now moving into in Isha Foundation, who is also making use of those rituals, but not in a religious way, rather than rather using it as a tool, as a technique. So
Mhm.
did you ever question, because you said you were a very rebellious child and you were very rebellious in school, did you ever question that prayer, that religion, that talking to God? Because
No,
with no,
I never
because
did. I just didn't. I was a bit strange though. I don't even think my family friends know that I would just be talking to God randomly also. If there was something going on my mind, it was like God was just someone who was around, like someone who I would just talk to. No, not like in my head mentally, not like aloud, but no, I never questioned it. I just was not even interested. I just felt good, going to those spaces, and I felt, you know, like good. And that's the thing, I didn't do too much. I just read just the Hanuman Chalisa, and that was it. And yeah, no, I didn't question it.
And
Hmm.
how do you feel about it now, looking back at that? Because how Sadhguru says we're moving from religion to responsibility, and that
Hmm.
people get easily caught up in praying. So
Hmm.
now after being in touch with Isha and listening and uh, embodying the what Sadhguru says, how do you feel differently about prayer, or what's your relationship to prayer now?
So it changed dramatically after I got into yogic practices.
Mm,
So, like I said earlier, when I would go to temples, I would go with the ritualistic stuff which we would prepare at home, and I would just go and give that to the priest and just say, "God, thank you for everything. Bless my family, bless my friends. Please help me do well." A small prayer. When I went after teacher training, when I went back home, when I went to that space, I was so shaken because it was so powerfully energized.
mm,
And I was meditating, and that praying just completely stopped. Since that day, I don't pray anymore. I mean, since then, I don't pray anymore. I just go to those temples and I bask in that energy. I just sit,
mm,
close my eyes, get super drunk, super charged. And it's amazing because there's so many different temples in Nepal, and each temple is so differently consecrated. So me and this other friend of mine who's a good friend from Nepal, childhood friend, he's also done a lot of uh, Isha programs. Him and I, we would go twice a month, not this year, but a couple of years earlier. And we would just go to these different temples and meditate. And so the whole equation, whatever, relation to temple going has changed dramatically. And I hope that, people who are purely religious, I don't want to take that away from them, because for people who are devotees, who are so devoted to God, through their emotions, I don't want to take that away from them, nor do I want to comment on that. That's person to person, because I see my grandmother, I see my mother. They're very devoted people, you know. They have a lot of faith and with their beliefs. They both do Isha yoga programs. They both do Hatha yoga. So they're doing their sadhana, but I just feel one thing is that, you know, Nepal, they believe a lot. I mean, they have calendars which talks about Ekadasi, which talks about full moon, all that. But I feel the way it is taught to us at Isha, it's not followed the same way in Nepal. Not, I don't know about Nepal, but it's not followed the same way, let's say in my house, in the exact way, the way it's supposed to be followed. So I feel like, you know, I wish that the religious aspect of it, because everything from the scriptures, everything there is, it's a Sanskrit chant. If you chant it, it is energized. It can do something to your system, to your life energies, you know. So I feel if we were made more aware of that aspect, then it would be even more enriching, you know. Because right now it's just you're just doing it like without you really using that kind of involvement and awareness. I'd say it's more coming from like just like praying, at least from my side, you know. I was just literally praying. So yeah, the shift for me was very good, because I think like I was looking for something where it was not about believing someone, it was about like working hard to get results, you know. And that's what I like about Isha Foundation. That's what I like about Sadhguru, is that he makes you work in the sense he initiates you into practices and he says you have to create your own life. So you have to work for your inner life as well, inner journey, you know. So, you know, because there's Adi Yogi and there's so much to do with Shiva, a lot of times I see and I feel that a lot of people can misunderstand what's happening at the foundation and think that Isha as well is a very religious ashram. Especially, you know, Hindus who look at Adi Yogi, definitely, like so many of my friends and family think that Isha is purely religion, you know. But uh, what Sadhguru is trying to do is he's trying to bring in the mythology of religion and the stories of, I mean, all the stories. He's trying to show you the scientific reasoning behind everything, you know, which is really nice. And I think that is why so many people from all over the world resonate with spirituality, you know, because it's got nothing to do with caste and religion and creed, but it's to do with you and your efforts,
Yes,
right?
I love that because I've seen people struggle with the idols like Linga Bhairavi temple. Even when I came to the ashram, I was like, I don't want to go into these temples because back like I'm coming from a Christian background and I never liked going to church because I felt like somebody's trying to teach me something. Somebody's trying to
Mhm.
tell me how to live, how to pray, how what not to do. And I never felt like welcomed. I always felt like, just as you shared, I love being in nature, and that is where I find God, or whatever you
Mhm.
want to call it,
Mhm.
myself. And so when I came to the ashram, I was like, wait, all this time I thought this is not about religion. Why do we have a temple here? But even
Mhm.
Sadhguru says, it was like for him, he would rather be in the mountains than at the ashram. He doesn't need a temple. He doesn't need these things. It's just about
Mhm.
offering this to the people so they can make use of it for their own growth. And so through my time at the ashram, in the beginning, I really did everything so that I not have to go and sit there. And I was like just counting the drops that were dropping onto the Dhyana Linga. And I was just think all the time I was thinking about it and not being there at all. I was just in my mind, in my head. And so, but I would say maybe 3, 4 months into the practices, I started to feel drawn to go. And now back at home, I brought, the goodie, and I always have lamps on because I feel the difference. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
and so I don't see it as an idol anymore because I don't
Mhm.
pray. I don't pray to it. I rather see it as a part of myself, as an extension
Mhm.
of myself that I don't look
Mhm.
up to, but I rather like strive to let that aspect of creation become a part of me.
Yeah.
So the feminine in Devi or Adi Yogi um, is just to, or even Jesus, for me coming from a background of a Christian background, even him, I I don't worship him, you know. That's what I didn't like about the church as well. They put him up, like they put him upon the wall and
Uh-huh.
crucified, and I was looking at him and I was like, why do we put someone, are, are we glorifying that someone got cruciated? Why don't we put a beautiful picture of him there, you know? And
Mm-hmm. No,
at
I
this
understand. Yeah. No, carry on.
So definitely what you said is the same for me now. Looking back at it, I feel very connected and even curious about certain parts of the Bible, about certain things that Jesus said, because I look at it in such a different way. And a lot of it has to do with also Sadhguru explaining and
Mhm,
going into the teachings and looking into what it is that he actually, why he said certain things, because I
mhm.
feel like we're missing out on that. So
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah.
No, it's true. No, you were talking about like idol worshipping, like there's one person. I see that a lot of times a lot of people also look at, like, let's say the Isha Foundation, like that. Like a lot of people question me, why do you have one guru, or why do you
Mhm.
follow just one guru? It looks like a cult. A lot of this happened, like people have been tell me this like in the last 6 years. It's been many years now, but so and that's the it's such a fine line between like perceiving it as a cult or perceiving it for what it is, in the sense that, like, I mean, when I got into Isha, I didn't know what spirituality was consciously. I didn't know how deep it was. And because the Isha Foundation is so focused on one's spiritual growth, it's such a, like, externally on social media, the way they market and advertise it, it could give people different, like, they've done it according to the way it is today in the 21st century,
Mhm.
to cater to the world, so that it's attractive to the world. Like, how Sadhguru was saying, when I talk deep, people don't really watch those videos, but when I talk about something to do for your body or your health, there's so many views. So it has to
Yeah.
happen like that. So I think, I'm sure for me also, I wanted to get fit and all of that.
Yeah.
But when you go deep into the spiritual aspect of it, the yogic practices, the meditative practice out of it, having a guru is very supportive. For me, like, because I've spent so many years at the ashram, most of my time in the last 6 years, and been through different kind of processes, and my sadhana has changed so much. Different levels or whatever. I mean, definitely having a guru is a huge support, because you could feel very overwhelmed and frightened, and you could even lose balance at times if you don't have not just your guru, but even, let's say, a brahmachari or a teacher, or even a friend who's not a friend, can't really help in that, but like, person who's been in this path longer, who's experienced, that guidance, that sangha is so important. And I think that is something which is sometimes misunderstood. It's looked at as a cult rather than it, like, because when we need to study, we go to a teacher. When we want to learn music, we go to a musician. When we want to learn dance, we go to a teacher. For spirituality too, why is there so much of an ego problem, or why is there so much of fear in people, for a guru? But then again, because there have been so many corrupt gurus in the world, and
Mm.
they've exploited people, that is one reason why people are a bit skeptical. Or even Wild Country on
Mm.
Netflix. So I understand where it's coming from, but I do feel for people who've experienced the essence of what it is, and who have been touched and transformed, it's a huge responsibility to very gently, inspire and share with people around the world, because I think it's something which it's needed in today's day and age in a big way.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yes, tell us more about your time at the ashram as you spent there as a staff and as a long-time volunteer. I would love to know more.
So after my teacher training, which was 5 months, the training was so intense. We were doing 7 8 hours of yoga every day for 21 weeks, no Sunday off. It was another ball game altogether. The way I think the way all of us participants looked the first day and on the last day was so different. I remember this so clearly. Even when you look at pictures, all of us had a huge transformation, a huge shift. So for me, after that, I felt like, I didn't want to, after I did my Samyama, I was clear I don't want to do my master's. So I continued as a staff at the Rejuvenation Center where I was teaching and I was getting paid. We have different health programs there or disease oriented programs. So we as teachers were helping the teaching aspect of it. So, spending long periods of time at ashram has always been very, very intense for me. It's always been very fast, because I've spent long periods of time at the ashram and then I've come out and spent long periods of time outside. I can clearly see that there's a huge shift in just the way you experience life or the way your mind functions, emotions function. There's such a huge difference. It's unbelievable. I'm sure you've had that experience as well, right? So yeah. So basically, for me, ashram, like I'm leaving in a few days. Like I'm going back after a year, and I'm really excited, but I'm so nervous, because I know what's gonna happen. I think when you're outside, you can control things more. You can control your life in the sense it's not as like when I'm in the ashram, I feel like I'm just like in the water and now I just have to swim, somehow. I feel like a process has started and you don't understand it quite literally. You just don't understand it because you have just such different ups and downs of your emotions and just the way your sadhana is. It gets so intense and exaggerated and so it's one of the best things I've done for myself is spent long periods of time at the ashram. And I would recommend it to anybody who has that opportunity to do that. They must do it because growth happens very fast there. Not just your spiritual practices, but even the way, your likes and dislikes are poked at, your ego is poked at, how you're always in a difficult situation, no matter what. Like, it's so funny. It's like you get comfortable, and I don't know how the space knows it. You'll just get into another difficult situation, right? So it's like you're constantly in action mode, and because you're doing so much action, when you're actually sitting and meditating, it's so blissful, it's so still, so it's this whole thing about so much action and yet so much stillness, uh which I don't, I'm not able to motivate myself when I'm outside to that extent. And also I feel like it's more mellow when you're out. When you're in, it's more hardcore. Like it's like you're on fire, so people ask me, why do you keep going back, like if it's so challenging, or people who've been to the ashram. But I feel each one of us know where we stand in terms of stability, balance, so I feel like depending on where you want to reach, accordingly, you decide how you want to take your life forward. So accordingly you plan, either you want to be in the ashram, or sometimes people don't feel the need and then they go out. So for me, ashram has been, I think it's been very fast.
What made you choose to leave and not stay full time, like not come out again?
I don't have the courage to do that. I don't have the courage to sign up for full time. I haven't done it yet. It's been quite a few years, but uh, I want, if I'm going to sign up for full time, then I don't want to ever come out of it. I don't want to leave, and I don't want to do that. So I want to be 100% sure that I want to be full time. I have been full time on the path since teacher training, since Samyama, like in terms of my dedication, my perseverance, my discipline, everything. That's been full time teaching everything. But full time ashram way, like I haven't applied for that because, I look at the full timers and it's a different level of commitment. They can't come out when they want. There's certain periods of time that they can come out, and it just takes a lot. And I really have a lot of respect for all of them. The people at the ashram that I've come across, be it the brahmacharis, or be it just the residents and the teachers, or full timers, I have so much respect for them because it's so challenging, just breaking yourself and seeing your flaws and like not being comfortable and always living in discomfort willingly. It takes a lot. So uh I just feel I'll end up like fighting with someone. So I'm like, wait, let me get balance. So I'm just working on my balance and comfortable, not comfortable, but will be long term for some more time.
Mm.
Yeah.
You spoke about your family going to Kailash and visiting Kailash, and I know that you've been there too. I've
Mhm.
met a few people from Isha who went there with Isha Foundation. So if
Mhm.
you could, I would love for you to share your experience of going there.
Mhm. So, my family had told me when I was like much younger, and that was all. I didn't think too much about it. But when when during BSP, one of the programs at Isha, they show you a short clip of Kailash Mansarovar, and I just remember Mansarovar looked so beautiful, and I was like, wow, I want to go there someday, but I'm not keen right now. So anyway, after my samyama, that's when everything was a huge shift in everything, and a few days after that, my mom had come for Mahashivratri. It was my first Mahashivratri, and that's when we decided. No, that's when it was so strange how it all happened. I remember Sadhguru entered. We were attending mystic conversations with the mystic, with this designer called Sabyasachi Mukherjee, and I remember he'd entered, and I had just come out of Samyama. You know that whole post Samyama. I don't know. You've done Samyama, right?
Yes.
Did you do it last?
No, the year before.
The year before. Okay. So yeah, so I did it in 2016, and then I don't know, I was just so sensitive to everything after Samyama. So I remember Sadhguru would enter and I just had tears rolling, and my mom was like, what happened? And I was like, I don't know. And then she gave me a hanky. And we're listening to him, and I haven't mentioned anything about Kailash to my mother. And out of nowhere, she just comes and she whispers and she's like, if you want to go to Kailash, tell your family, tell your granddad, tell your dad, they'll send you. And I looked at her and I was like, really? I was like, Mom, if I go, I know. What I had done is in Suryakund, sorry, there were pictures of Kailash and Pashupatinath.
Mm.
So I was showing it to her the day before, and I was like, see, this is Pashupati, they go for this yatra. So I don't know, I didn't tell her I wanted to go, but she just, I don't know, she randomly just said that. And that's when I was like, Mom, if I go, I'm going to go with Sadhguru, I saved up for my masters, but after Samyama, it's clear I don't want to go for my masters. So, so anyway, so I ended up going 6 months after Samyama, and Samyama was so intense for me that I just had such a strong desire to just be in Sadhguru's presence. I was so overwhelmed with everything that had happened that I just wanted to, like, I don't know, like, I needed some stability and balance. I needed some grounding, and I wanted to be in his space. So when I went there, it was just the entire experience of those 21 days. From 1 week they take you on a trek to Nepal, and then they take you to Tibet. Throughout the trip, Sadhguru was just preparing all of us each day, and just to see how, like, he's such an inspiration, because if I just look at him as just life, just as a human being, he's just like a child. Like, he's so childlike, and he's just so much life, just exploding with so much compassion. Like, I've never come across such a compassionate human being. He was so sweet to all of us, and just so loving, and just so kind, and he like just melted all our hearts with that love and compassion and tenderness. So yeah, that was very beautiful, just being in that space. But also, uh, as we came closer to Kailash Mansarovar, he kind of changed his way. He changed, he started becoming really distant, very serious, really intense, which was a bit overwhelming. We were like, what's happened to him, and something was happening to him as well. And it was actually quite challenging being around him, it was very intense. And so the pilgrimage for me was a mixture of very, like, beautiful, a lot of love, but at the same time, it was very tough and very intense. Like, the closer we got, the more scared I got. I wanted to run away. I remember when we reached Tibet, I was like, I want to go back. I'm so scared. I want to go back. I just got so overwhelmed by, you know, just being in his space, because he's so charged, when you're around him. Like, I don't know, it's just, you want to run away. Yeah, I don't know what it is. So, and you want to be close at the same time as well. So it's that funny feeling. So I remember one profound thing that he told us during the treks. We used to trek with him every day. Was He said this before one of our treks. He said that, today in our trek, you just look at everything without giving it a name. He's saying, when you look at the sky, don't look at it and be like, huh, that's the sky, or that's a tree, or that's a bird, or that's the road. He's saying, forget English language. Just look at things and just look at it for what it is, without bringing the memory of your of language. This is what he meant. These are not his words, but this is what he meant. I found that so interesting. It seemed like a psychedelic trip, where you're just looking at things and you're just reverberating with it, because there's no mental stuff that you're connecting with it, but you're just simply looking. And so I think that was very, very profound for me. And uh, when we reached Kailash Mansarovar, that space is so charged. It's so overwhelming. I don't know what to call it, but it's just so close to, I don't know, heaven. I don't know, grace. I don't know what it is, but it's a very, very powerfully created space where, I think everybody should go there once if they can. It's a very, very special place. So the initiation, everything was just very overwhelming. I felt it was a continuation of Samyama, and it just left me. It just humbled me. It just made me feel so small. And it wasn't just particularly Kailash Mansarovar, but that whole 1 year of teacher training, all the programs, Samyama, and then the cherry on the cake was Kailash Mansarovar, where you realize you're so small, you're so irrelevant, and you have to keep reminding yourself. And when something so overwhelming hits you, like Kailash, the initiation process was so overwhelming that when something like that happens, then everything just drops. Like for me, like my rebellious nature, or being immature, or like wasting my time, just like damaging my body so much. Damaging in the sense like not taking care of it, doing whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. You just start valuing things in a very different way. And I think all that happened, you know and just a huge responsibility. Sadhguru just gives his life and energy into you. So when that kind of stuff is in you, be it with any program or anything, you just want to be responsible, and you want to take it out and expand it and make it grow. Not Satguru Isha Foundation per se, because that's where people get stuck. But it's what he's giving, the yogic sciences, spirituality. So yeah, that's
Is there more that you can share about the initiation? Because generally we know initiation as getting a practice, or being initiated into a practice. What kind of, is there any information about this initiation? What kind of initiation it actually is? Like, what is it doing?
you mean this, where he
Yeah.
puts. So I mean, what he says that this I'm initiating you so that you're open to receive what Kailash has to offer. So he's
Mhm.
saying this initiation is only for Kailash. You know, he didn't go into the details of it. I read a lot of it online, but uh, the initiation was really powerful for me. I remember when my turn was coming, the volunteers tapped me and said, you're next. So there were three more people ahead of me, and the closer I was going to him, the more I was just breaking. I was just sobbing so hard. And when I reached him, it was so not embarrassing, but it was so overwhelming. Like I was literally like, I was like not hitting like banging, but I was hitting my head on the ground because I was so overwhelmed. When I look back, I'm like, what happened to me? I don't know. I wouldn't do that. Like I'm so cool, right? But over there, I was destroyed. I would say I was just totally destroyed. And then when the initiation happened, I won't go into the details of it, but I remember I was like, oh, I'm not feeling anything. When he put his hand, I was like, I'm not feeling anything. And then something happened, and I couldn't wake up. I don't know what happened. And then Sadhguru had to wake me up because I don't know where, what, but, and then I woke up, and then I went and I just meditated. And then when the initiation ended, I was still sitting, and then something happened with the mountain, and I wish I could share it, but I would
Yeah,
not share it because it
that's
could just
good.
lead to a lot,
Yes,
controversial. I don't know. It just people
it's
could
better.
misunderstand.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
people might imagine
misunderstand.
things. So yeah, it's good to keep these things for yourself. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's already a
yeah,
lot.
yeah. So what happened with that mountain was just I couldn't believe life can exist like that. It was just
Mm.
unreal. And to be honest, like a lot of my logic was destroyed throughout teacher training and all of that.
Mm.
But this mountain just overwhelmed me, And the funny part is, few months later, when I did Samyama Sadhana, I had the exact same experience in the Dhyanalinga temple. And I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. I was just like, what? Like, how is that even possible? So then I was like, it's all the same. You know what I mean? Just the the intensity of it could be different because that's a mountain and it's open, and the Dhyanalinga is like, it's more, I don't know. But yeah,
That is such an interesting experience. Wow,
yeah.
that's wonderful. It's like experiencing something in Sadhguru's presence and then doing a meditation by Sadhguru in your home and experiencing the same. That's how it was for me. I had like a certain experience meditating with Sadhguru, and then I did a meditation with my dad actually when I went through inner engineering with him, and it was a very similar emotion or a very similar way that I felt as I felt when I was with him.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
similarly, sounds like having an
Mm-hmm.
experience in the temple and
Mm-hmm.
at Kailash.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
you use a lot of like when you talk about it, you say it's kind of a psychedelic experience. And you coming from a background where you used to take psychedelics, how do you look at psychedelics now? Do you feel like it can be useful in certain way for someone to maybe push them to go into the spiritual path, or is it does it leave like a long-term impact on the brain?
That's a good question. So there was a period in my life where I was a firm believer that once in a person's life, they must try LSD at least once, and they should smoke at least once. Because I felt that when I experimented with psychedelics, what it did to me was it opened me up beyond what I knew in the limitations of my five senses. It opened me up and it made me experience life in a much more expanded way, in a much more deeper way, in a much more, I would say, like, very deep way, which was very real, which I never saw before, like, so it added a lot of richness in my life, I would say. But yes, there are side effects to it because you just have to take it in, and immediately you're on this intense altered state for hours straight. The way it hits your nervous system, it has side effects because the nervous system is one of the most sensitive parts of your system, and how sensitive your nervous system is will determine how you experience life around you, how sensitive you are to everything around you. So there's definitely a side effect. I felt like, uh, there is a little bit of a side effect there for sure, and now when I have worked so hard to you know to make my body into a temple, or to align the body to be so particular about it and do everything so properly, I can't imagine taking LSD. I think it would be very detrimental for my growth, very detrimental for my body, because when you're doing yogic practices, you realize what goes into, you know, receiving or experiencing a certain state. It takes a lot of hard work, it takes a lot of discipline. If you want to do it in a way where you're not disturbed by any, if you want to do it with absolute, in the purest sense possible, where no external factor is disturbing it or coming, then it takes some sort of effort. It's not so easy just to pop it in. So I feel like when you're doing yogic practices, you're slowly climbing up the ladder. Once you hit it, that peak, you never go down. It's with you all the time, anywhere, every moment. So now when I say it's like a LSD experience, is that just today I was eating lunch in the garden, and I was eating and I was just looking at the trees and the crows, and I'm just tripping. Like, I'm not exaggerating this. I'm just so stoned and buzzed. What effort? Nothing. It's just because I've invested a couple of years on these practices and I've hit a certain stage, and that's it. You can access it anytime. Whereas for LSD, it makes you very dependent. I know a lot of family and friends who I used to think like this, like, once a year, you go travel to a beautiful place and you trip, you know, but it kind of makes you dependent, and it definitely affects your nervous system. It makes your system, your organs weaker. It makes everything a bit more rusty, and it's a chemical, so there has to be side effects to it. I won't go into the details of certain experiences I've had, but I'll tell you that later in private. But definitely it's more organic, more real. It doesn't delude you. When you're doing LSD, you can also be in a delusion
Mm.
at times.
Yes, there's such a small gap between intuition and real experience and imagination and
Yeah,
delusion. Yes.
it's so close, and LSD could do that to you.
Mm.
Actually, it could really do that to you. Like, even like in Psy parties and stuff. The music there, the good music. Because it's all vibration. I love like music where there's electronic music or psychedelic music. I've always liked that kind of music. But I see that most people there are all on heavy drugs and then experiencing the music. I remember 2.5 years ago, a friend of mine who's a DJ, he had come to Nepal and he was performing, and me and my friend, we'd gone there. And he's a very good musician, and his music was so good, and I was just dancing so much. I felt like I was on all the drugs. I felt like I was on all drugs, just so high. People were like, "Are you high?" I was like, "No." They were like, "You've taken nothing." I said, "No." And that's the possibility of doing yoga meditation, that it can make you, like, one of the best things that I've achieved from yoga meditation is that I'm constantly drunk and stoned and high. And that's what I loved doing before. I used to love getting high. And not just me, I think everybody in the world wants to expand.
Mm.
So they're smoking, they're drinking to relax their nerves. But when you've invested on yourself, it's actually, it's like, it's a silly example, but it's like there's nothing wrong with a Maruti car, but it's like you're driving a Maruti car, but when you tap into this possibility which is in us, which is like, it's an explosion. When you tap it, it's so explosive, it's so strong, it's so forceful. It's like the speed of a BMW. It's so fast. The quality, the everything. It's so sophisticated. It's so pure and intense. So I, I so wish, like, more and more people experience this, because for people who've known me, they've known me like someone who's
Mm.
like loves to get high or loves to get stoned or loves to party. And I took this 365-degree turn, and they just couldn't believe it. They just thought I was weird. And I would tell them that I swear to God, like, you can actually get drunk and stoned. Because a lot of times people ask me, how come someone like you has managed to maintain this? And I'm like, because you get so drunk, you get so stoned. That's why. I was like, I'm like seeking for, intoxication. But I worked hard for a certain period of time, and then you just have it all the time. So
Yes.
I, yeah,
That's
yeah.
yeah. I used to always, when Sadhguru was saying you can be high without taking drugs, I was like, no, this is not possible for me.
And
This
me
may
too. I was like, what?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely it is 100% for sure. It does take commitment, but it's worth it.
You know what the funny thing is? I remember in Samyama program, when I did Samyama, you know how Sadhguru barely talks? He hardly speaks, right?
Mm.
And suddenly he goes like, those of you who've tried LSD don't know how much damage you've done to yourselves. And I was like, what? I was just like, oh my goodness, that's me. you know? So I don't know why he said that. And a year later, Lapo Master, he had said that spirituality can be like a 24/7 LSD trip. And I was like, oh, is it? And it really is. It really is. Like, in terms of just realizing that everything in the existence is just energy vibrating. Like, if
Mm.
you just look at things, you just are, buzzing. And it's time to move from just reading it in a book and understanding it intellectually to really experiencing it. And I think it has to start in education. It has to start from a young age, because you see the Samskriti children, right?
Mm.
Look at those kids. Like, they're so lucky. They don't have to make that extra effort like how we've made, because they've just got it since they were young, and it's just something which is which is part of their life. And so I think one of the biggest reasons why it's so difficult for humanity to really go inward is because we've not been introduced to it as young children, or so.
Yeah, I remember talking to one Swami at the ashram, and I was asking him because he seemed not to have any compulsions when it comes to food, and I was always struggling, not struggling as much as I would at home, but I was always like, I want something sweet. I would I'm craving pizza or whatever. And I asked him, "Do you never
Mm.
crave pizza?" He said, "I never had pizza." Like in his life, he always had wholesome, fresh food, Indian cuisine, and he never like he doesn't have even that thought of, oh my God, I'm craving pizza. Because I feel like a lot of the things that we want or crave are just things that we are used to, are just things that it's like a conditioning. And so
Mm-hmm.
changing that, and that we can see with Isha Sanskriti kids, once they come out of the ashram, um, they don't go but like they don't go into some nonsense, they don't go into cravings, they don't go into compulsions, they just reach a certain level, and just as you said, once you're there, you're there.
You're just there. Yeah, yeah. No, it's an interesting thing you shared, because even at home, we have some helpers who've been with us for many years. And these people remind me of life in ashram. They're living like our life in ashram. They're waking up early in the morning, they're working for hours, they take a cold water shower, they eat 2 times a day. They've not grown up eating pizzas and donuts and all of things we've grown up with. So they don't really care much. Their immunities are so strong. Their immunities are so strong. you know and they're gardening, they're doing these different things. And looking at them, I just realized that's what it is. It's that lifestyle that we need to make a shift. Like it really makes a huge difference. And they all have this. And most of them are not educated, but the intelligence they have is so much more deeper than us educated people. I can see it so clearly because I've grown up living with them. So it's it's so interesting.
Yes,
you know
education can mess you up in many ways also, because you start to
Educated
calculate.
tools.
Yeah. Maybe a last thing that I would love for you to share, as far as you can, is your experience of doing the Kashi Krama. Because
Kashi Krama.
yes, I never met anybody who, or maybe no, actually no, I don't know anybody who did that.
So basically, Kashi Krama happened 2 years ago, and I think that was the first time Sadhguru, not first time, but Sadhguru was going after many years, and they called it Kashi Krama. So my grandmom was born and brought up in Kashi for many years. So she always spoke about it. So my plan was to go to Kashi with sacred walks for 3 days, and then stay on with my other cousin, and my granny would fly for 7 days. So when I went to Kashi with Isha Sacred Walks, like it was such an overwhelming place. Like it was so crowded, it was so dirty, it was so noisy, it was so chaotic. I got so scared. I was like, I don't want to be here. I want to leave. I just like. But then they took you to all these like really powerfully, consecrated spaces, and then you just get used to the whole space, and then you realize it's such an interesting city. Like every nook and corner there's something happening. Like there's so much life, there's so much activity everywhere, and so many temples, like so many like consecrated spaces. uh it was such an experience. I would highly recommend that you go there as soon as possible. It was such an experience. And so we did all of that, and then at the Ganga, we had an initiation or a process, you could call it, with Sadhguru. We all went like, I don't know what to call them. Like they're not like small boats, but those double decker boats.
Mm.
You know,
Hmm.
they have 2 decks or whatever. And then we all were sitting on one. Sadhguru was in one, and there were some other people, and then other groups. So it was very beautiful. We were facing Manikarnika Ghat, is the ghat where they burn dead bodies. And he made us do a process where he said, you just look at these burning ghats, and you just look at your child burning and you look at it for what it is. He said, don't look at it as an emotional thing. Just look at it for what it is. And whatever's happening, let it happen. So, it was pretty intense. Like there was music playing and all of that. And it was very intense. I mean, for me, because I don't have a child, I couldn't really go on with that. So I went on like burning people I know, family, friends. And it was really intense. The whole process was so intense. And it just made me feel like Kashi is so old. Like I don't know, but at that moment, I just felt the vibe of that place. So ancient. Like I don't even know what that meant, but it just made me feel so old in a way. Not old, but like it was very beautiful the process. And just to look at that fire and to see, or to visualize like people to lose them. It was a very intense process. Death is so important, and I think we are always reminded of it being on the path by Isha Foundation, by Sadhguru. So it was a very again a humbling process. Pilgrimages have always been very humbling for me. They just enriched me. They've just always been so humbling, and like it's just very grounding, the whole experience. And then I went for my own pilgrimages where we went to lots of Devi temples one evening, one day, three of us Isha meditators, and there's just so much happening at Kashi. It's just a very, very ancient place, a lot of significance. So yeah, that was my experience. It was
Thank you for sharing. It was
welcome.
wonderful. It was wonderful to listen to your story and get all of these insights. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for having me. It was very interesting to just share and have like, you know, to open up and talk about all of these experiences.
Yeah, I'm sure people will love listening to your experience.
I
Yeah.
hope so. I hope I didn't speak too much.
No.
Anyways, yeah, it's been quite a blessing for all of us, I think, to just, encounter this, and hopefully more and more people are inclined to it. It'll be so
Yeah,
nice.
it's happening. It's already happening.
True, it's happening. Yeah, I'm always skeptical. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, it's
No,
nice.
I can see it even here in Germany. I can see it. Friends from mine who are picking up a Sadhguru book. People who start to meditate. A lot of people who start to meditate, and yoga. Still, most of the yoga that people do is gym yoga. But
Hmm.
as Sadhguru said, once we have 10,000 people teaching yoga, Isha Hatha yoga committed, then it will naturally move into that direction. So
Hmm. And you're planning teacher training too, right? Next year.
this year.
This year. Sorry, yeah, this year. I'm excited for you. It's it's one of the best things that happened for me, teacher training. I'm really excited for you. It'll be
Yeah,
so nice.
thank you. Okay, I will stop the recording.
I'm looking for this doggy. Anyway, so I'm looking forward to it. We're
Yes,
recording again.
yes, to say bye.
Are you serious? No way. No, start again. Because I know earlier you just like abruptly stopped the recording.
So thank you so much, Sunaina, for coming into the podcast.
Thanks, Stephen, for having me. This was a lot of fun. And I'm waiting to watch the full video once it's out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
Namaskaram.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do hit the like button. Also, comment down below where you guys have tuned in from. It's always nice to know. And finally, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Namaskaram.